is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire C Book 1 of Sea and Shadow. Chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. In these chapters, we get to see Calder Martin meeting his future wife. And it turns out Jerry's been keeping some secrets. I've been assuming this whole time that Calder was aware she was a soulbound. Apparently not. Shit. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George is here in the chat. This was a real surprise to me. You know, there's the moment where Naberius asks, can I assume that at least one of you is soulbound? And I didn't really pay attention at the time to the fact that Calder doesn't think about Jerry's name. But I guess I just assumed that so many of them were soulbound that he didn't even bother naming everybody. And so it didn't really sink into me at the time that didn't come up for him, because really, even if he weren't thinking of everybody, because there's so many, his wife really should be top of the list when it's occurring to him, So I think it should have gotten my attention, but it just did not. And the whole way that this winds up working out, because, once I sort of began to settle on the idea that it was actually Calder whose POV was going to be in the book, the facing book, as I keep thinking of it, there's two trilogies that are facing one another. I kept sort of wondering what it was going to look like from his end when Jessalyn gets taken. Not Jessalyn. Oh my God, Jerry. I just keep calling her Jerry. And I assumed that he did definitely really care about her and that he was going to be upset. But I really like this addition to everything. It could have been kind of a boring, I just want my wife back. And of course, that's certainly a major theme, and I'm not mad about that being a part of it. But it's also sort of tainted with this uncertainty and this, feeling of betrayal that makes it much more interesting. And there's a desperation to wanting her back that is not just about wanting her to be okay and her welfare, but actually about him more than anything, and him wanting to get some answers about what the fuck and find out whether or not she meant anything that she ever said to him and whether or not their relationship was even real. But she's starting to wonder, has she been under deep cover this whole time and lying to me? And I just, was too personally in love with her and actually invested in her to realize that she didn't give a shit. Which, you would definitely wonder that, right? It appears that she is working for an organization that he says he has gone up against with her more than once. That she has worked by his side against people who worship the elders. So the fact that she is out here on their side is baffling to him. And I don't know what to make of it either. The speech that she gives to Shara, if I were only reading this book and I hadn't read the other one yet, I think that I would be assuming she was pretending to be one of their agents and not actually sincerely an elder worshiper. But we see how completely sincere her pitch, for lack of a better word, is to Shara, and how much she means it. We could stand to learn a lot from the elders, and all of that felt like it was ringing really true. She meant it and believed it. So having that perspective, I think that is genuinely where she's coming from, and she's just been hiding that from him. And we'll get to that. But I am just really interested in this, and I appreciate there being this element of, I don't know what word I want to use here, just uncertainty, I guess, to him wanting to find her. It's more than just a sheer revenge or sheer love. It's laced with this extra nuance that I just think is a lot more interesting, frankly, you know? So, starting off with chapter 4. I love this, guys. Chapter 4, you know, all of these chapters are starting with sort of like, they're either quotations from something or entries in journals or whatever. This one is from the rejected proposal of the Aurelian Bankers Union to the Guild of Magisters. I love this so much. When someone charges an object with their intent, we call that process investing, and we say that the object has been invested. Why? Are we nothing more than slaves to ignorant tradition? The early empire knew nothing of finance, and thus nothing of true financial investment. I think you'll find that our proposed term, empowering, really captures the modern spirit of today's empire. Y'all, if they don't get the fuck out of my face with this. I love this so much, though, because it just feels like such a thing that would actually happen. That a bank would be like, well, we want people to invest in stocks, but investing already has like a really popular usage. What if we just tried to completely rewrite that? Yeah, you would, wouldn't you? Get out of here. And I love it. It's just rejected. So then we go to Calder's mother. We get to meet her. And it is about what I was sort of expecting. She is a badass. And Calder, in this conversation with her, he really reveals himself to be such a child. Because he keeps thinking he's going to fool her. Babe, sweetie, look, I know that you think you're really smart. And you know what? For a kid your age, you probably are. But, oh my God, you are so not nearly as smart as you think you are. And this is one of those things that as I get older and I look back and I remember a grown-up saying to me, yeah, I know, at your age you think you know everything. And, you know, as a kid growing up in the era that I did, as a millennial, and probably people a bit older than me as well. I think even maybe the generation behind me, but perhaps a little less so. We all were sort of conditioned by the media that we were being given, movies and television. And a lot of that stuff, for when you were very young, was all about how there was this like young upstart in a society who wanted to do things in a different way. And the older, stuck in their ways people who just like had run out of imagination, didn't want to allow them to express themselves or try something new. And the young upstart eventually manages to get their way and prove that indeed they do have a better idea of how to do things. And that all it took was somebody taking a risk, because otherwise all of the older people were stuck in their ways and unwilling to even experiment a little bit. And wouldn't it be great if a young person got their way every now and then and actually listened to the elders, actually listened to them, you know? There are so many stories like that I can't even like list them all, because that's how most of them went. And because of that kind of media, I think as a youngster, I really was convinced that being young, I just was free of the kinds of bonds that come with age, of being convinced that things can't change, of being accepting and sort of just apathetic, I think. And like to a degree that certainly does happen. And it's not, there's a reason that's a bit of a trope also. That's reality. People get set in their ways, or they get tired, you know, of constantly trying and failing and deciding that they just don't want to try anymore. But I think that so much of that, because it's geared towards kids, of course it makes kid characters the heroes. And so I really like absorbed that messaging in a way when I was young and believed that simply youth itself was a type of imagination. Do you know what I mean? And because of that, I really did in some ways think I knew better. And look, there is some truth to that. There is a freedom to the minds of people who are young enough to have not been like hemmed in by the rules that come up later. I think often about something very simple. I was probably like 6 years old and I was coloring in a coloring book, and it was a picture of a butterfly, and I colored in each wing in a totally separate set of colors. So one wing was totally different than the other wing. And my aunt's boyfriend at the time was like, why didn't you do them the same? And I looked at him and I just said, 'cause that'd be boring. And I was totally serious. And that's the kind of thing I mean, where as an adult, just doing something as simple as making the two wings totally different patterns would never even occur to me, because that's how limited I am in a lot of ways now. And I had such freedom that I would just be like, yeah, whatever, do two different things. I would not do that. It wouldn't even occur to me to do that. But there is also something to be said for, as an adult, you've fucking seen this shit before, and kids think they're doing something original, and actually they're doing the same shit that's been done a million times, that indeed you yourself did at one time, thinking you were really saying something. And there's something about that with this scene. Calder really is out here acting like he's got something new up his sleeve, that his mother isn't going to like figure out what game he's playing. He keeps trying to flatter her, thinking that that's going to work. There's moments where he tries to like sideline her and she seems to take the bait, and he really is like, oh, I have her now. And it turns out he's so wrong. Like, not just wrong about having her, but also never bothered to find out that she herself is a reader, so he's completely underestimating everything she's able to do. Like, this is one of those things that I think about as a kid, the number of times that I thought I was probably, like, telling myself, I'm really getting away with something here. And you know what? I bet if I went back in time, my parents fucking knew all about it. I bet they knew. And they just like let me think I was getting away with it, because you know what? There comes a point where it's just like, whatever, fine, do the thing. And that's the thing with Calder. He really keeps thinking he's getting away with something, and then being brought up short and told, no, actually, I know, you're not fooling me. And it's just great. I really enjoy her. I also like the vibe that you get off her, that she kind of regrets not being part of his life. And that is interesting to me. And I'm really wondering why it has taken her so long to like reconnect with him, and why now. I'm assuming that it's just because of the sheer audacity of what his father was trying to do. But so his mother, Elsa Greyweather, what a name, was everything Roderick pretended to be. She could trace her family line back to the dawn of the Empire. She wore only the latest in imperial fashion, and she owned her own 3-story home in one of the capital's wealthier districts. In Calder's mind, she needed more flaws. She was too perfect, like an elder spawn stuffed into human skin. And of all the imperial guilds, she had to work for the worst one. She works for the Blackwatch. Her family line was supposedly impressive, but mostly confidential, the imperial records of her family having been sealed for security purposes. Oh, really? You don't say. Color me fucking curious. I feel like that's significant. I'm very interested. And she says, basically, like, what the fuck were you thinking going with him on a burglary? He needed me, Calder insisted. Only I can tell him what's fake and what's worth taking. Worth taking? You have too much talent to waste on someone like your father. At least you'll be better off with me. I've always wanted to meet you, Mother. To think you had a house like this, I'm sure Father would agree I am better off with you. He smiled up at her, watching a brace of ornamental pistols without moving his eyes from her face. 80 silver marks. One side of Alsa's mouth curved up. She was a pretty woman still, with rich brown hair running down her back. I love this. The smile, like, he doesn't seem to realize it, but I think it's clear to the reader, she knows exactly that he's fucking casing the joint. She knows that's what he's doing, and that's why he's like, oh yeah, I could stay here with you. That'd be fine, no problem. Yeah, let me stay here with you, whatever, that's cool. And, like, dude, come on. Your eyes practically have dollar signs in them. You're not fucking... He's just not getting one over on her the way he thinks. So this is when she says that he'll learn to ride and a bunch of other things important to his future. And he's like, my future? Well, what does that mean? Like, future? You're too old to find a place among the consultants or the champions, thank the Emperor. But riding will be important if you find yourself with the witnesses or the Green Wardens. You seem surprisingly well educated, despite Roderick's influence, so you might enjoy a life with the Magisters. And all of this sounds like a fucking prison sentence to him. And he's like, I'm educated. And she's like, oh, really? Are you? In what year were the Green Wardens established? The Green Wardens, then known as the Brothers of Peace, were originally founded to counteract the spread of weaponized alchemy and a sudden increase in the worship of Othagor. They were established in the 8th century and remain one of the most influential imperial guilds to this day. Very good. I'd only correct a few bits here and there. They were originally known as the Sisters of Peace, as the first generation of Green Wardens were all women. They were meant to counteract the worship of Arkmagut, not Othagor, established in the 7th century rather than the 8th, and they are among the weakest guilds in terms of both political power and available capital. And he is just... at least has the grace to be a bit ashamed of how wrong he got this. I'll give him that. You know, he has a moment here where he's like, fuck. And you know what, sir? Yes. It's interesting to me because I can't quite get a handle on his motivation in this scene. It seems like he thinks he was well educated. I'm assuming that this is just him not being as trained as he thinks he is. Because it's not like he just pulled that question out of his ass, or the answer, I should say. It seems like he really thought he was giving the correct answer, right? So he's just not that great a student, is sort of the vibe. And there's another scene a little bit later where that seems to also be the case. So, yeah, this is when she says it will be important for you to know the history of the Green Wardens should you choose to join them. Chimera are fascinating creatures, and you would work quite closely alongside them in the Green Wardens. In fact, Imperial history is a critical subject for any of the guilds. I'm not sure I see myself as a guild man, he said. I had thought about boarding a ship for Azyria and connecting with my heritage, perhaps as a sailor or a hunter. And she just totally ignores this. You should familiarize yourself with the fundamental philosophers and penmanship. And he's like, oh, come on. And he pushes her here. I'm as intelligent as any rich guild son. I'm quicker. I can think on my feet. I could do quite well outside the guilds because I can get along in the real world. Calder had taken that speech point for point from an angry rant his father often brought forth when he'd been drinking. Not word for word, and because he thought his mother would appreciate eloquence more than passions, but he did believe it. The guilds acted as though they were part of some private world, running the empire while everyone else simply benefited from their expertise. And I love this moment. There's a moment where, like, his father used to say things about how the Green Wardens wouldn't be able to survive without money to, like, you know, just be able to feed themselves. And there's all kinds of reasons why that's not actually true. But he, like, goes through a very specific series of thoughts to specifically push that thought out of his mind because it doesn't line up with the assertion that he's making here, you know? Also looked as though she was having a great deal of trouble restraining her laughter. The real world, you say? I see. And you think I don't live in the real world, do you? Is that what your father said? And I'm sure you're an excellent watchman, watchwoman, watch lady, watchman, she said shortly. Be that as it may, you have to admit a guild lifestyle is somewhat insular. Insular was a word he had learned from the news sheets last week, and he was determined to use it as much as possible. Wouldn't I be better trained if I continued to take on the broad world as it is, facing all its dangers with eyes wide open? And she cocks a gun and is like, so how would you face this danger? And he tells her, I would first avoid situations like this, but also I could invest things like this pillow to be bulletproof. I love this. If I had some more time and the proper equipment, I could awaken it. But that, he shuddered theatrically. Who knows what powers that could unleash? And this is when she's like, wow, really? Could you do that? And he's like, oh, he had her. And he starts to be like, well, I might need a little bit of time. And she shoves the pillow against him and pulls the trigger. And he has this moment of like, this bitch shot me. Genuinely thinks and is looking all over himself for the bullet hole. And then is like, motherfucker. And he immediately assumes, oh, it wasn't loaded. Okay. And she quickly disabuses him of that and is like, no, I don't keep unloaded weapons in my office. He placed his hand against the pillow and focused it. His mother's voice smothered his mind. You cannot be punctured. Every one of your fibers is a cord of steel. You only have to stop one shot. You cannot be punctured. She had actually invested the pillow with enough intent to stop a bullet. With such a brief touch. When you're bragging, make sure you know who you're talking to. She bent over, plucked a misshapen lead ball from the floor, and tossed it into his lap. He examined the pillow, but other than a small black smudge from the barrel, it was pristine. Calder straightened himself, striving to look as dignified as he could, with a burning face, and without looking his mother in the eye. You're a reader yourself, then. I'm surprised your father never told you. What did you think I did for the Blackwatch? He had imagined her as a clerk or some kind of administrator, but he wasn't about to say that out loud. Yeah, I guess I have to assume that these abilities tend to be generational, right? That they're like a genetic inheritance. And if his father isn't a reader, it's interesting to me that it never even occurred to him that his mother was one, unless that's just not how it works. I'm assuming that it's inherited, but I don't have necessarily any like evidence for that. It's just that tends to be how things work in fantasy, you know? She says, you're fortunate. Readers are in demand. You speak well. You're perceptive. If your talent is like mine, when I was only a little older than you, I had guilds lining up to bid for me. Actually bidding. That doesn't sound so bad, he admitted. There's quite a bit of variety in the 10 guilds. I'm sure you'll find a place where you fit in. In the meantime, I'll have a tutor here for you before the end of the week. And he looks at the swords and is like, will I get tutored in how to use those? And she's like, oh yeah, you're going to learn all 3 of them. But you're not going to be taught by him. I will be teaching you. And this is it ends with, in the space of a day, he had traded thieving lessons with his father for fencing lessons with his mother. His father was still missing, and Roderick's absence was like a burning hole in his chest. He would have to find a way to bring all 3 of them together. He was a reader. He could do it. He could do anything. And I am taking this to mean that he wants his parents to get back together. Am I misunderstanding that? Is he doing the whole, like, Mom, Dad, work things out? Because he, I don't know. Maybe he just means that he just wants to see his dad. But the way that he says all 3 of them together, that's what it feels like to me. And just, I've said this before, but my parents divorced. They waited until I was like 18, I think, to divorce. They waited too long. I wished that they would divorce from a pretty young age because it was so obvious that they did not get along. They weren't suited to one another. And it felt like an abusive relationship in a lot of ways. So to me, whenever I read about a kid who wants their parents to get back together, I'm mystified because for me, it was never about the value of the parents being together. It was about whether my parents were happy and how unhappy I was being around them when they weren't happy. So I am always sort of baffled at kids who evidently are so unaware of how unhappy their parents are. And I don't know if it's just because my parents were worse at hiding how unhappy they were. Like maybe other parents are better at doing that. And that's part of why I was like, why would you want them to stay together if they're not happy? That sounds like it's miserable for you. Maybe it wasn't miserable for them. Maybe it seemed fine. But yeah, that was how I took it. And I'm just kind of like, come on, man, don't do that. So then we go to 5. And this is when we get the scenes of Shireen is trying to convince him that they should leave tonight. And she really is a lot more concerned about everything than he is. He does not seem to take these like stories of assassins and the guild's people seriously. And it's unclear to me whether she just takes the stories more seriously or if the fact that she is involved with something that he doesn't know about has given her some insider information. I feel like it's that one. Because there's something about the whole way this goes that leads me to believe she knows more about the whole mission than she's letting on. So yeah, this is when we could still make it out of the bay. And he's just like, man, I'm tired. And the elder is tired. I don't want to make it move us. It's not going to want to. I love this. If I make it, it might leave us here. I'll be the first captain to have his actual ship mutiny on him. And let's see. You really expect assassins? Isn't it more exciting if they're real? I mean, I took this as just her being cute. And now I'm like, oh, maybe not. Maybe this was her being like sly. So he said, even Naberius said it would be okay to spend the night here. We're not in a hurry yet. I wonder why not. What do you mean? Well, Cheska rushed to send us the message. Then the two of them scurried to get on board without bothering to meet us first. But now they don't mind if we sit in the harbor all night. He shrugged. We'll be leaving in the morning. That should be enough hurry for anyone. So I'm wondering if she thinks, because, you know, I was questioning this last episode, the fact that Naberius turns down staying in their cabin does feel like he knew if they were going to try assassinating him, that was where they would look for him. So is he trying to get the ship to himself? Is he hoping that Calder gets killed? Because I can't imagine that were Calder dead, Naberius would be able to handle his ship. I mean, unless he's got abilities that I don't know about, which is, you know, we don't know anything about him really, so that's certainly possible. Or if his silent one is able to I don't know how it works if you're soulbound to something. Can somebody else soulbind to it after you're dead? Is that possible? I have to assume it is. And also there's the elder, which like him being soulbound to the ship helps him communicate with the elder. So I don't know. It just seems like there would be a lot of obstacles if he were to die. So my instinct is like Naberius wants him to die so he can just have the ship for himself. But there just feels like there's a lot of small logistical reasons why that wouldn't actually be an advantage at all. And I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm curious though. Okay. So, yeah, let's see. He says, it's got to be an Imperial artifact, does it? It must be a good one if he's willing to spend 10,000 gold marks on it. A good one, maybe, but it can't be the best one. How much do you think he'd pay for that? Calder rested his foot on his secret lockbox chained beneath the bed. I'm assuming this is the one that's got the key that opens any lock, right? Is that what it is? And she says, like, this is the best one. And, I mean, I guess that's debatable since it turns out we're going up against a Heart of Nikothi, which kept the Emperor alive for all that time. But this key does seem like, I mean, it is so wildly useful that I can understand being very confident saying that. I don't know. Maybe that's not what she's talking about, but I think it is. And this is when he sees that her earrings are still in her ears. Aren't you going to take those off? She leaned back, bringing her hands up. These? Oh, it's too much trouble taking them out. We're going to be up early. I thought I'd save a step and leave them in. In his memory, she'd never left her earrings in to sleep before. It seemed uncomfortable to him, but it wasn't like he made a practice of wearing jewelry. What did he know? So, if this whole thing, like her being soulbound and him not knowing about it, and as we know, she's soulbound to those earrings. We see that from Shara's perspective. Also, it's not noted that she's soulbound in the pamphlet, the file that Shara got. And Shara's like distinctly irritated about the fact that she had the wrong information. I am going to assume here she only just became soulbound to these. And that's why he doesn't know about it and it's not in the file. That this is a really recent development. So they lay down, he falls asleep, and he sees a green flash through his eyes that wakes him up. And I had forgotten how far along the fight was by the time he interferes with it. So yeah, he wakes up and walks out to see Shara fighting Jerry. And Jerry is holding green flame in her hand and is like, he just stares at her, and it's described as her looking at him as if she had caught him in bed with another man. Or he had caught her in bed. Ooh, a very different story. Yeah. That wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. No one could use powers like that except elders and chimera and those humans who borrowed their powers. Soulbound. So that's interesting. I don't think that we knew that being soulbound was borrowing power from elders and chimera. But that phrasing is significant to me. I just don't I don't think anybody had really phrased it that way in anything else. And I feel like that changes things for me a lot. But his wife wasn't a soulbound. She couldn't be. He was a reader. He would have sensed it. Light and life. I'm married to her. So, yeah. The killer says, I'm not here for you. I don't suppose I can convince you to go back to sleep. I won't let you get what you want. Time's almost up. That which sleeps will soon wake. The assassin jerked as though Jerry had kicked her, but the words couldn't have hit her any harder than they hit Calder. He'd never expected to hear them from his wife. And this is when he makes some sound of, shock, probably. And this is when she turns and sees him. The woman in black sighed and reached down to something at her waist. There is something about the description of this coming from Calder's POV. We know that throughout this, it's not like Shara wasn't scared. She was. She knew she was up against some shit here. But apparently it just doesn't come across at all. She doesn't express that. So when he is watching this, instead, it just seems like just profound boredom, irritation, frustration. And I find that so funny. That really got to me. I enjoyed that a lot. So Jerry gets shoved overboard and Calder is just like, what the fuck? And he connects with the ship in order to try and see underwater. And also tries to attack Shara with the ship itself. But she's really quick, as we know, and gets out of there. The woman in black landed in a crouch inches in front of him. And she had the ice-cold eyes of a woman who didn't care if anyone lived or died. For some reason, that stoked Calder's anger further. He tossed his pistol aside and pulled his cutlass, so similar to the dueling saber he'd trained with as a child. And reminder from Shera's perspective, he is described as like a competent sword fighter in the file. But when she goes up against him, she's like, that feels like it needs to be updated. Holy shit. Like, she's genuinely impressed. And he can hear Urziah beginning to wake up, and eventually he tries to shoot her again. And let's see. The bullet tore out a crater in the wood of the deck, and the woman in black kicked in Andel's knees. How had she gotten away? Urziah had recovered from whatever the woman had done to him. He took a black hatchet in either hand and roared. The killer didn't wait around. She turned and ran the opposite direction toward the bow of the ship. So Calder he, by the way, got hit with a needle, and he's trying to follow her, trying to yell, trying to do anything, and he's just getting overcome with this drug. And he has enough time to see Naberius and Tristania fall from the mast and the beginnings of that fight. He didn't realize that Tristania, because he hadn't seen her weapon. So Tristania uses her Stormwing Tail whip. And he's like, oh, shit. Naberius says, I can promise you safe conduct if you're willing to have a civilized discussion. Whatever your contract is, I can beat it. Calder could only see the black-clad woman from the back, but she was slowly reaching one hand behind her back to grab something from her belt. A hilt. A second knife. Once more, he tried to call a warning. This time, he fell on his stomach. Shadows swallowed him. His last thought was a vision of Jerry kicking and panicking as she slowly drowned in an icy sea. So he wakes up, and everybody is sort of assuming that Jerry is probably dead. When he finally talks to Naberius, Naberius is like, man, they're not kidnappers. They're not like political blackmailers. They're assassins. They don't take prisoners unless they would think she knew something. And is there any reason for them to think that? And this, like, he reads the ship to see what happens to Jerry. And there's this moment where he gets into her mind. She focuses on the stern deck under her feet. This is the ground she had to defend. Her husband sleeps beneath her, and there's a killer on the ship. She brings up her power, willing herself to be silent, mentally urging Calder to keep sleeping. There are so many reasons she needs to stop this consultant here before the assassin can accomplish her goal. The sleepless have demanded it. And it turns out Naberius actually knows Shera by name because he used to see her at the palace. And this is, let's see. I love this. I had forgotten to mention this like last episode because there was a lot. But Calder uses quotations a lot mentally. Like he'll think of some prophet or some philosopher's, sage advice on something. And it's kind of fun to like see that he had been so incorrect so many times when he was a kid learning, and that now he's able to call this shit up with like practically no effort, and it's part of how he lives his life. Anger is a cruel thief. It gives one the illusion of focus while stealing away the real thing. Which, that's fucking true. So, let's see. Can you think of anything she might have known that they would consider valuable? No, she didn't know anything. Andal stared right at Calder, but Calder forced himself not to meet the man's eyes. He knew. Andal had never quite trusted Jerry, for a good reason, as it turned out. I am so curious about Andal, because Andal comes up to him later and is like, so, I know you don't want to hear this, but it's good that she's gone, and you're about to kill us all, so we're going to have a fucking talk about this. And Andal is just, like, coming at this from a clear-headed place, and I want to know more about him and what his whole deal is. I have to assume he is the one that they are considering trying to make an emperor. I really feel like that rings true for me, but I've got nothing to base that on. It's just a vibe. So he asks Naberius where she'd be taken. And Naberius says the Grey Island, but that place is a fucking death trap. And you have to know that the best way to find her is to, like, see Shara again. Shara's their number one. If they sent her this time, they'll send her again. And she knows where we're heading, and she will go there too. So the best way to do this is to actually follow through onto the next step. And this gives Calder another quote. While the wise man listens to his advisors, the fool listens to his heart. And he asks Naberius what treasure is worth this. And Naberius just does a lot of the best treasure, the only treasure, but he doesn't actually say what, and he refuses to do that. And finally Calder's like, all right, fucking fine. So then we go into chapter 6. And Calder, it turns out, is holding onto this key still in the same pocket that he has invested to keep it secret. And he keeps reading the key and feeling more and more unnerved by what he's learning about the Emperor. The Emperor places his hand in the lock, twisting it, ignoring the pleas from the family within. We're innocent, they say. Have mercy, they plead, but they're not innocent, and so he leaves them to die. And he twists the key, but the dungeon lock sticks. It's old, though not nearly as old as the Emperor himself, and choked with rust. But he feels the resistance for only a moment before his desire to have the door open, his wish to get this business done quickly, invests the key with enough intent to spring the lock open. Kellerak will take your soul, the woman growls, showing off rotten teeth. Nicothi and Othagor will share your body between them. That which sleeps will soon wake. If she weren't soul-bound, he would kill her now. But her powers might be useful in the future, so he twists the key again, willing it to seal the door. The lock snaps shut without a hitch. He unlocks the dungeon, wishing he could leave the task to someone else. But this prison, alone of all the prisons in the world, he has to maintain personally. This is where he keeps people who have found his secrets. Those who pass this door only do so once. And as we're getting all of these, it's Calder had assembled something like a picture of the man. He was confident he knew the Emperor as well as anyone else outside the Imperial Court, and he was becoming convinced the man was a monster. And he doesn't know how this key got out here for anybody to find, and knows that it would be a problem if it was found, for many reasons. He even considers, because at this point, reminder, the Emperor is still alive. So he's like, man, maybe I could use this to get my dad out of jail. And then he's like, oh my fucking God, of course not. And I'm so glad that he quickly realizes, yeah, no, he'd just kill me. He'd just kill me and take it. He doesn't need to, negotiate with somebody like me. I would just be evaporated where I stood. He would take the key, and that would be that. Especially considering probably the Emperor would be able to tell that he was a reader and would know that he had been able to get all sorts of information off of it, which, yeah, no. And would the Emperor find out about Roderick? If he did, Calder was certain his father would die in that cell. Calder would have to do something. So it's the first day with the tutors, and he goes down there to see them. He thought that there was only going to be the one, but there are 3. 2 witnesses, and let's see, a pair of dark-skinned Heartlanders. They were also brothers, Artur and Voris Belfry. I am the chronicler, Artur went on. I read and record imperial history as I witness it, then I spread that knowledge to others. He patted his belt, which was lined with candles. All but one were wrapped in brown paper. The single bare cylinder of wax was snow-white and half-burnt. My brother is my silent one, my guide and bodyguard. He covers his mouth as a symbol of his refusal to speak secrets. And Calder just pulls the scarf down to take bites of food and then puts it back up to chew. It just gave me very strong COVID mask vibes, I'm just saying. And And then the third person is Gyrene. And they're very young, but Calder is already like, oh, goddamn, what? And tries to impress her many times. And honestly, she seems so easy to impress that I can't help but wonder if this isn't all a big, like, setup, a con of some kind. Children, are you familiar with the works of Sedesthenes? And Calder quotes something, and Vorus just shakes his head, and Alsa says, that's an impressive quotation from Prion IV. He wrote a continent away from Sedesthenes and a century apart. Gyrene's earrings caught the light as she grinned at Calder. Ah, but I see what you mean. They had practically identical views on imperial conquest. And Artur is like, yes, I'm sure that's what he meant. And I'm like, oh, he knows that ain't what it was. How embarrassing. There's a bit of a back and forth here about the various things that they're going to learn about. But Gyrene is like, I want to know what you guys have seen. I want to hear your stories. And Calder's like, yeah, is it true you can store memories in your candles? And everybody stops dead. And the witnesses look at his mother like, the fuck? And she's like, I didn't tell him. Calder, where did you hear that? And I found this so funny. This felt like a real moment that parents have with their kids of just being like, I didn't say that. What, man, what is this? Is a kids say the darndest things kind of moment, you know? And Artur tells them about this thing that they have figured out using an alchemical wax. And what a cool idea. I love this. We devised an alchemical wax that is particularly sensitive to intent. It can record a few days' worth of memory so that when I burn the candles later, I relive the events exactly as they occurred. Thereby, I ensure the accuracy of my own recollection. And this is when Calder notices the tattoo on her left hand. Guys, I have to say this. The line of script, which was nothing like a standard imperial, began under the nail of each finger and crawled along the back of her hand. Word? Under the nail of each finger? I don't think so. Thanks. No. I decline. No. Just no. Ew. Oh, God. That's like a literal form of torture. I hate it. And Gyrene gave her tutors a charming smile. Will you burn one for us sometime? I'd love to relive a battle or a chimera hunt or a duel. The way that she's described as giving them a charming smile and wanting to hear their stories, I'm like, this bitch a spy. Right? Has to be. That's what's going on here. I don't know. So, he decides to make a deal with them. Artur says that they can, like, every time that one of them finishes, let's see, when we reach the end of each chapter, I would be happy to answer one question from each of you. But they're not particularly happy with that. That seems like a fair deal to me, but they don't like it, of course. Also, Gyrene asks Calder as soon as his mother's out of the way, what does she do for the Blackwatch? Don't ask me, Calder said. I've never heard except that it involves something called a whispering gaunt. Artur shivered, and Vorsa made a strange sign in the air. He drew a circle with his fingers, roughly parallel with his own face. It's best not to speak of such things, Artur said. And Gyrene is like, what things? I want to know. And yeah, this whole thing, I love the fact that both of them are just determined to find some things out. And Artur is like, you know, like I said, he's game to give them some information. So then we go on to chapter 7. For a navigator, Calder wasn't a very good navigator. That had been Jerry's job more than his. And I'm just like, if that isn't the way so many things function in the world, there's a man who's got the title and a woman who actually does the job. And he is at this point just relying on Naberius to tell him where to go, and genuinely doesn't know if they're heading in the right direction at all or not. Like, that's about all he's got. And there are these things called the starlight spires, spikes of metal that stick up from the water. And I'm really like, it's sort of that they're treated as if they are man-made, but I can't tell if that's like, if they're like an accidental like occurrence, some sort of side effect of something. I don't know, because the way that he talks about them, it kind of could go either way. I took it as that they were man-made, but it could be that they're like natural formations. And it's just a really, really dangerous area. So it's kind of crucial that they get through this area before sundown, because the spires light up with like sort of starlight or firefly light, but in a way that could be disorienting and trick your eyes. So one would think you could get through in the dark, but not really. And this is when Duster comes up to him, Foster really, and hands him a bottle, and it's like, I got you a present. And Calder just opens it and takes a swig, thinking it's going to be like some really intense, nasty shit. And instead, it tastes yummy, like peaches. And he's like, oh shit, what is this? All chemical wine? Foster shrugged. How should I know? I got it from Petal. Calder sprayed a mouthful of orange wine over the deck. Not good? Oh, well, I'm sure she's got more. I thought, you might like to hit some targets for a while. Foster hefted his musket. Calder ignored him, focusing on his body. Did he feel the warmth running through his veins? Was it poison? Something worse? Should he lock himself in the hold? And eventually, he starts smiling uncontrollably. And it becomes clear that this is like Petal's attempt to help. She's just like, well, he's sad, so make him smile and it'll be better. And he's just like, oh God. And if I act like this didn't work, she's just going to try something else, and I'm going to have to watch all my food from now on. Meanwhile, Calder says no to Foster about shooting. If I stopped to shoot for an hour, we'd all be dead. Foster shifted from foot to foot, looking at his handful of targets. It helped me, he said at last. Calder stopped. If anyone understood how he was feeling, it was Foster. He'd earned a reputation as a world-class gunsmith, which had made him quite a fortune along the Empire's elite. It was considered a distinction to own a Dalton Foster original. But that was before the Emperor's death. Afterward, until the 4 regents and Imperial Guard restored order, the capital had spent a few months swallowed in chaos. An opportunist had found Foster, kidnapped his family, and forced him to make a gun. Every day until he'd finished, Foster's family was tortured. Not all of them made it. The survivors, scarred and scared, had abandoned Dalton Foster, his own wife and children. As far as Calder knew, the man hadn't seen or heard from them for years. Holy shit. That is a grim backstory. Jesus Christ, man. Yikes. And it's like the kind of thing where the fact that they abandoned them, it's like, is that absolutely heartbreaking? Absolutely. Is it totally understandable? Yeah. I mean, it's not his fault, but being associated with him, you know? And it's really interesting because, like, there's such a trope amongst superhero and you know, anybody who's got, like, abilities. Oh, you can't get close to me. They'll use you against me. And it's always, like, the people who love them refusing to leave their side. I'm loyal to you no matter what. I can take care of myself. And the hero who is so selfish, pushing them away and refusing his own happiness for the sake. And then in this one, it's like, no, his people were like, fuck this, and got out. That feels a little bit more realistic to me, to be honest. So this is when he begins to realize that the wine is making him smile. And for Petal, it was pretty good logic. He thanks Foster and says some other time, perhaps. Foster nodded and walked off. Calder honestly couldn't tell if the man was offended or relieved. So then here comes Urziah, and I love this. Urziah is like, I'm so glad to see you smiling again, man. You look great. This is like so much better. And Calder thinks about like explaining to him about what like the reason for his smiling. And then he decides not to. And it says, knowing Urziah, he might think it was a great idea. And then we find out later, Urziah does know and does think it's a great idea. He's like, yeah, we should let Petal drug you more often. Urziah, I'm so sad you die. I'm really bummed. Yeah, maybe he's not dead. I keep holding on to the, like, maybe he's not, but I think he is. But maybe he's not, but I think he is. But maybe he's not. But I think he is. Anyway, he tells Calder it's time to move on. And Calder's like, oh, you think so? And he's like, don't misunderstand me, not to a different wife. I just mean move on to the next step. Vengeance. And Calder is like, yeah, that's all I've been thinking about. Are you kidding? Other than the fact that, like, she's clearly been lying to me and I have no idea if any of our relationship was real. Urziah pulled out one of his black-hafted hatchets. It was my fault. Yours? And he says, Calder realized he was talking suddenly to a different person. Not his cheerful cook, but the Izirian gladiator. Banished to the arena in the hopes that the fights would kill him, Urziah Woodsman had managed to survive for over a year despite unstoppable odds, and a single assassin had rendered him unconscious from the shadows. Urziah, no. If she had stayed to fight you, you would have torn her apart, and she knew that. It's why she took you out first. Urziah looked down at his hatchet. There were poisoners in the arena. They tried to hide and poison me. It has never stopped me before, and it will not stop me now. Gyrene has secrets from you. That is not good, but every man has secrets. You two will talk, and you will work it out. Once I have killed the consultant and brought Gyrene home. A champion does not fail, even one in disgrace. You understand? I like you like this, smiling all the time. This is how you should be. I will tell Petal to drug you more. What a delight. What a wonderful guy. He's great. And get very Orthos sort of energy off of him in a lot of ways. And this is when Tristania comes over. And she just stares at him for a while. And eventually wraps him up in a blanket. She pressed in the corners like a mother tucking her child into sleep. He wasn't quite sure why until she finished, patting him on the shoulder. She let her hands linger there, squeezing as if to give him strength, and then left. For some reason, he had to blink back tears. And he just keeps the blanket wrapped around him the whole time. I just, for some reason, really rather like that detail. He kept wearing the blanket. Let's see. Calder's attention sharpened. Only one tilted silver spike loomed ahead of him and one more behind. After that, they'd be clear. He'd learned the hard way. You had to focus most carefully when it seemed you were safe. That's where a trap would do the most harm. It helped that Petal's potion had finally started to wear off, so his lips only occasionally smiled without permission. And this is when Andal comes up. And he says, I'm sorry we don't know if Gyrene is dead or alive. I wish we could have dealt with this another way, but for your sake, I am glad she's gone. And Calder is like, what? And he uses his connection with the ship to knock Andal on his ass. And Andal just basically like crosses his legs and keeps sitting. And it's just like, I said what I fucking said. And he's like, you know, my whole job is to keep you on track and tell you the truth. And the truth is you're going to kill us. And finally, Calder, after a moment of just wanting to literally fling the guy off the ship, calms down and realizes like, oh God, he's right. I got to chill. I've got to listen. Let's just assume Jyrene was completely justified in keeping secrets and that her loyalty is beyond question. We're left with a few things to consider. Why did the consultant take Jyrene captive? For that matter, why did an assassin capture anyone at all? Then let's move on to past the consultant's intentions. What are the actual results of her actions? She has someone to interrogate, so we can assume she'll know everything about our capabilities. Then you are left in the position of wanting to recover your wife more than anything else. More than delivering the passenger, more than getting paid, more even than arriving safely. One way or another, that means you will be trying to speak with Shara. True so far? True. If she had not captured Jyrene, would you care about talking with her? No, I would not. Instead, how would you deal with her? Avoid her, if at all possible. I'd try to dock somewhere she didn't expect. I'd try to trap her, pretend we were safe, and have Urziah and Foster ambush her. Andal nodded. And now, instead of doing what the trained assassin least expects, we're going exactly where she wants us to go. That is how you're going to get us all killed. You're right. I'll think about it. We've got a little time. Assuming you don't drive us straight into a reef, we're not likely to die tonight. From up the crow's nest, a deafening masculine voice bellowed out, "Die tonight!" Then a black shadow bobbed down, fluttering across the reddened sky until Shuffles landed on Calder's shoulder. It turned its scowling black eyes to Calder, wiggling its tentacles. In case he didn't hear it the first time, it shouted, "Die tonight!" one more time, straight into his ear. And Andal jumps off and says, "All hands on deck." And Naberius is like, what the fuck? And Andal says the Elder Spawn only wakes up from a nap if it thinks we're all going to die. And it's in a good mood, which means it's nearby. And distantly, a storm of glowing sulfur yellow clouds began to gather on the dark eastern horizon. They pulled together like threads of shining, unnatural mist. "Worm cloud," Andal announced. What in the Emperor's name is a worm cloud? There was no point in trying to outrun a worm cloud. It would only follow them. So Calder steered straight for it. If I'm not mistaken, Naberius, you're about to find out. I'm just realizing here, George, I stopped reading there. I thought that was the end of the chapter. But it wasn't. There's still more. I thought that... I'm sorry. And I was like feeling like I was doing pretty good on time because I knew just how little was left. And so, yeah, I'm at time. All right, well, I'm going to include this in the next run. And hopefully that won't be trying to squeeze too many things into the next episode. Oh my God, I just started reading the next section. Oh, it's a cloud that drops worms on the ship. That's not what I thought at all. Oh, I thought it would suck the ship up or something like a wormhole. They landed with a splat, little fat grubs the size of a man's foot with a single horn on their heads. Oh, this is horrible. They squeaked while squirming across the deck, searching for the nearest source of warm blood. This is horrifying. Oh my God. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. And it's not that many pages. And George says the next session is only 43 pages. So yeah, with this, it should only be 50 and that should be fine. Wow. Well, I can't say I'm too excited about reading about those things now, though, because they sound fucking horrifying. But my apologies, I just got that wrong. I was listening to the audiobook, and I think that it just, like, there came that heavy, like, pause, and I assumed that was the end of the chapter, and I just, like, shut it off, because I have had a tendency with audiobooks to, like, just let things wash over me and keep listening past where I'm supposed to. So I've been trying to be more alert about it, but I just took it too far in the other direction this time. My bad. All right. Well, guys, I will include that in the next section on Tuesday. Thank you for bearing with me on that, George. My apologies. And I will see you soon with a new one. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.